Okay, so welcome again. For those of you who don't know me, I work at the Sugar Beet as the marketing director there. And then my secret identity is the tomato lady of Oak Park. So I start seeds, quite a few each spring. And the cool thing for me about seed starting is that anyone can do it. And you really don't need a ton of equipment to do it. You do need a few things. We'll go over that, but it's a really fun and exciting way to get gardening earlier in the season, as well as having other benefits, which we'll go over. All right. So this is just a little background about me as the tomato lady. I started gardening as a child with my parents. We had a little vegetable garden plot out at the edge of the town in Crystal Lake, and years of gardening there with my parents, eating just a ridiculous amount of tomatoes during the summer when they were ripening. I think every counter surface in my parents' kitchen was covered with tomatoes in various stages of ripening when it was tomato season. And right about when I left home is when hothouse tomatoes came into being, and those terrible, very plasticky, not flavorful, not the wonderful heirloom tomatoes or even homegrown tomatoes that I was used to. So I started growing a tomato in that era in a 5-gallon bucket on my fire escape in Chicago. And then it just kept blossoming from there. And wanting to have really interesting tomato varieties is a big part of what really spurred me to start my own seeds. So there. If you are just joining us, I'm just asking that you mute yourself for the presentation, please. Thank you.
Oh, you'll never guess who's on the call.
So why start seeds? Well, like I said, I started them because they have a better selection that way. You can pick out all kinds of varieties that you will never, ever see for sale as a seedling in your local nursery or big box store or whatnot. So you have a lot of variety that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. You control the source of the seeds and also the growing conditions for the plant. So if you want to grow organically, if you want to use open pollinated seeds, etc., you have control over all of that. To save money, it is less expensive to start your own seeds. You do invest your own time and energy that somewhat replaces that, but it is less expensive to start seeds than to purchase seedlings already grown. You will hopefully have healthier seedlings that are acclimated to this region, rather than buying seedlings that were grown somewhere else in the country and then transferred to the Midwest climate. You know, you have seeds that are seedlings that are ready to go, that are grown in the same climate and region that you are in. And one of my favorites, you get to start gardening earlier in the year. So I already have seedlings going, and it's really wonderful to be able to go in and peek on them. And you know, in the midst of a cold winter day, or you get to go in and look at little green growing things is pretty exciting. All right, here's visual evidence of one of the reasons I start seeds. This was last year, and Mother Nature has arrived with her snowfall for this year as well. But this was February 16th last year, what it looked like outside and what it looked like inside for me. So like I say at the bottom there, little happy growing things are the ultimate winter pick-me-up. One of the things you first might consider is what you want to start from seed. So a few key pieces there. What are you excited to grow and eat? I mean, you want to grow things that you are energized to take care of and garden with and whatnot. Obviously, that's going to make you happier and make you more connected to growing and gardening. What grows well in your space, either your region or your specific garden space. Here in Oak Park, a lot of people have a fair amount of shade, not necessarily a lot of sun because of the lots of trees. So you have to think about what your garden space can work with and can grow. And then right underneath there, we have space and sunlight for that. You know, if you are only growing in pots, you may want to adjust what you're going to start seeds for that ability, that arena. You're probably not going to do, maybe you will, but you're probably not going to do things like a winter squash or something that's going to vine all over if you have a really small space. So thinking about what you want to eat, what you have space for, and then what do you have time for. Some things are more high maintenance than others. And if you're a new gardener, start with a few things that you're really excited about, and then you can grow from there in subsequent years. So seed starting is kind of in two main camps. There's direct sow, things that like to be planted outside, can tolerate the cold, don't like their roots being dislodged. Those can all be sown directly, and you don't have to start them indoors. Some of them you can't. We'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. But generally speaking, these things are going to be sown directly outdoors. That's not really what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about things that you would want a head start for. So, like I said, some things that are normally direct sow, you may have reasons that you want to start them ahead or indoors in pots. These are two issues that I have in my garden space. I have a lot of squirrel population, and they like to dig things up. They really are attracted to seeds before they're germinated. So I will plant things inside or in pots and make sure that they are germinated and growing before I plant them out, so that I have a little less of that. And then limited space. I have a small garden. It's very densely planted already. So I can plant things and grow a plant and then put them right into the spot that I want them in. So I have a little more control over that, rather than trying to seed different spots in the garden and remember to keep them watered while they're germinating, etc. So there's a couple reasons you might select things that are normally direct sow and actually start them indoors. So starting indoors, most seeds that you're going to start indoors are going to be things that have a longer growing time than what is available or allowed in this region. We have about 170 days of growing season above 32 degrees. Plants that need longer than that will need a head start. And then some things like onions are started super far in advance. They just have a really long growing season. There are some things like some flowers that need a longer season, and that's maybe a little less about temperature and just about time span to get them to actually flower during our summer fall season. So as you're looking for seeds that you want to grow, you're going to notice most seed packets have quite a bit of information on them. They're a really great resource and help. They have an estimated last time before the estimated last frost date in each region. We're in the growing region 6A. And so that is telling you an estimated last frost date of April 20th. And a lot of the seed packets will tell you, plant or start indoors X number of weeks before the last frost. So you would take that date of April 20th and count back how many weeks before then to determine when you would seed start different different things, what length of time they need. A lot of that information is on the seed packet. Most of them will talk about how deep to plant. They may tell you how far apart to plant. There's usually a lot of information. If there's not, you can do a quick Google and see more information about the plant that you're interested in planting. So I just touched on this. We are in zone 6A. This is a map of Illinois, and you can see where we are up in the corner. There's a little swath of green. That's the 6A zone, which is equivalent to kind of the lower middle half of Illinois. Because we have the mitigating factor of Lake Michigan, we have a little warmer climate. So we're in a warmer grow zone than the surrounding kind of collar areas around in the suburbs. So I already talked about this a little bit. You count backwards to see when you're going to start the seeds. And there are also some charts that you can utilize if you're a visual person, or if you just want to see all comparative and kind of help keep track of when you would start things. These charts have both seeds that you would plant outside and inside on them. Again, sometimes you have a choice. And then it also gives you an idea of when the harvest would be for those different plants. There's also an option for some things that you can grow them twice. So you can plant in the spring and then you can plant again in the fall. I won't go into that here since we're kind of doing a beginner seed starting info, but it's something to keep in mind if you want to extend your grow season, that you can plant things like lettuces in the spring and plant them in the fall again, or spinach. There's certain things that like cooler weather and that have a short enough season that you can actually plant them in the spring and plant them again in the fall. So if you want to maximize your growing potential in a space, think about that.
Not too, I'm making a tool order. Do you want anything?
All right, like I said, equipment, you do need some basic things, but there's a lot of flexibility there for most of it. Obviously, you need seeds, you need some kind of soil. We'll talk about all these a little more in depth, but a containers, a light source.
And
Okay. Anything else?
Please make sure you're muted.
Huh?
Thank you. A light source, I think that's one of the biggest failings with new seed starters, is that they think, oh, I have this really bright sunny window. You really should have a light source for your seedlings so they can grow healthy and strong and they have enough light. Again, we'll talk about this more. Water, obviously, and time and patience. Some other things that are optional but very useful: a timer, plug-in timer for your lights, a germination lid or cover is just to retain moisture with the seeds. A heat mat speeds up germination times for seeds. An electric fan to move air. It helps with some specific diseases or issues with seedlings. A temporary greenhouse or cold frame is helpful for hardening off. Again, we'll talk about all this more in depth. And a thermometer, so you know what your temperature is in your house or in your greenhouse or outside or whatever. All right, so the first thing is seeds. You can purchase them, you can save them from plants you've already grown, you can swap with somebody else. Once you've figured out what you want, you just need to figure out where to get your seeds. So here are some of my favorite sources for seeds. And I also mentioned there are a fair number of local seed swaps that are really wonderful, especially if you're just starting out and you don't necessarily need a whole package of whatever seed. You can go to a seed swap and you can just get a few of different types and try it out. So some of those are listed on Facebook groups. There's a great garden Facebook group in Oak Park. Some of them are online, or there's different spaces that share those, but they're worth looking out for. All right, containers. like it says here, almost anything that can hold soil and moisture. So you just need something that'll hold the soil. You want something that has holes in it so it can drain. But this can be as basic as a reused yogurt cup, or, a cut up core of a toilet paper roll. You can use those and just set that on a surface so that the bottom is sitting on a surface and it holds the soil in there. Or you can use true seed starting trays. The only key there is if you're reusing anything that has had a plant in it, that you want to clean it and then sterilize it in a 10% bleach solution, so you're not having any issues with things lingering from previous soil that was in that container. Trays and germination domes, or reuse salad containers with lids. You basically just want something for those trays to sit in, and so you don't have water flowing all over your house, obviously. And then the germination dome is traditionally a clear plastic lid that sits over the tray. But like I say here, I use regularly the 1 pound salad bins that are just a clear plastic. They have a flat lid. You can use those as a germination dome. You can use the smaller ones. You can really be flexible and creative and be able to reuse a lot of stuff without having to go out and access more new items. Soil, generally recommended is a soilless mix. There are some issues potentially with pathogens and whatnot with the very new seedlings. So that's with a planting mix that has compost or so like a fertile soil in it. So you will see seed starting mixes sold that way. You can make your own mixture here, like I show on the screen. And then if you're doing a soilless mix, you would start fertilizing after the first set of true leaves. The seeds have enough nutrition in them to live until they start producing their true plant leaves. We'll talk about this in a little bit. But until that time, they don't need fertilizer necessarily. So you just want to make sure that once they get their true leaves, that they will get fertilized from that point on. And then lighting. This doesn't have to be something fancy. I use shop lights generally. I have a mix of fluorescent and LED lights. The fluorescent have cool white bulbs in them, and the LED are 6,500 Kelvin or as close as possible to that number. And they're all on timers for 16 to 18 hours per day. You keep the lights as close as possible to your plants so that they get the most intensity. And again, this, what I said before, this is probably the most common question I see is people put things on their windowsill and they think, oh, I have this really sunny window and it looks really sunny to me, but to the plants, it's not enough sun. And you'll see them get very, very tall and thin and spindly. And that's one of the major reasons why they would do that, is that they're looking for more sun. They're trying to get closer to the sun. So investing in a basic shop light, keeping it on a timer and keeping it very close to your seedlings is key to have healthy, stocky, robust seedlings. And these are one of my seedling setups. These are very basic IKEA shelves that I've rigged up with some LED lights on them. You can see how close they are to the seedlings. And then you can see, so this image is right after they've germinated. And then the one next to it is after they've been transplanted into their individual cells, and they're obviously taller. So I just keep adjusting the lights so that they are just above the plants. So I want them nice and close so they get as much intensity as possible. And then I also reuse this plastic, it's kind of like bubble wrap with a reflective surface on it. And I put that over the top of the lights and I hang it on the back side of the shelf. I'm just trying to bounce as much of that light back onto the plants because the more the better for them. So that's just an inexpensive reuse, kind of those bags that you can get, you know, thermal things are mailed in sometimes, or I think some of the shopping companies have pickup in those bags, and I just cut them open and use them, reuse them in this format. It's also sold as a lightweight insulation, so I have some of that. All right, now that you have gathered your supplies and you've set up your growing area and you figured out your timing, it's almost time to start seeds. One more piece of information is that there are kind of two main ways to pot up your seeds or plant your seeds to germinate them. The top image is seeds put all together in one pot, and then they're going to be what's called pricked out after they've germinated and started growing their true leaves. This methodology has some benefits. One is that you are going to be able to select the strongest seeds, the biggest seedlings, and it's very densely spaced. So you can put a lot of different seedlings in one area. I use a heat mat, so it's kind of nice to do it like this because I can put it a lot more on the heat mat than I could if there were one in each individual cell. So that's one methodology. It's kind of more work because you have another step of transplanting, which we'll talk about, but there are benefits to it. And then the bottom image is what I think most people do is they'll have a seed tray, and it has this little individual cells, and they'll put 1 or 2 seeds in each cell and wait for them to germinate. And then if there's more than one, they'll just clip the one that they don't want to grow on and keep it going that way. The positive with that, like I said, is that there's less labor involved. You're not having to transplant them an additional time. And if you aren't doing a ton of seeds, this is an easy way to have it set for a very long time. You can put it in there, let it germinate, keep it growing on. You start fertilizing, and then you just wait until either they're going to be transplanted into the garden space or they're going to be transplanted into a larger pot. So two ways of doing it, two things to think about when you're deciding to get started. All right, when you're ready to plant your seeds, you want to be aware of some things, including the seed depth or how deep that seed wants to be planted. Some seeds need light and want to be right on the surface of the soil. Most seeds are planted a depth down. Traditionally, that is twice the diameter of the seed. But again, this is something that will regularly be on your seed packet, or you can Google it if you're not sure. You just want to make sure you don't plant them too deep because they will maybe not end up finding their way all the way to the surface, or it'll take them an extra long time, or too shallow because they won't be able to get their root system settled into the soil when they're coming up. So be aware of that. Remember to label your pots. This is definitely a lesson I have learned the hard way. So I have thought that I would remember what something was. Doesn't necessarily happen. So make sure you label your pots and you label them with something that will be able to deal with moisture, or if it goes outside, something, some kind of permanent marking system. So you don't have to worry about what something is after you've taken care of it for weeks or months long. Lighting, like I said, most seeds don't need light to germinate. That's why they're planted in the soil. There are some that go on the surface that need light in order to germinate. Again, look at your seed packets. I tend to put my seeds when I plant them under lights right away. They don't need it while they're germinating necessarily, except for, like I said, the ones that are on the surface, but most seeds don't need the light. For me, it's just like, it's there, it's ready to go when they're up and sprouted. And then I don't have to pay super close attention to them, and they have that light right as soon as they need it. Temperature. Most seeds like warm temperatures to germinate. You're kind of creating a facsimile of it being spring and it's warm, and those seeds, you know, are designed to wait until it's warm enough for them to be safe and growing outside. So they want a specific temperature. They want warmth to know that it's this safe space for them to grow into. So you can either keep your seeds once you've planted them at a warm room temperature, or you can also use a heat mat, which speeds up germination. Your seeds will still germinate without the heat mat. It just makes it faster. It's about half the time. But if that's not a concern for you, you can do it at like I said, a warm room temperature for germination. Ideal temps are around 70, so between 70 and 75, so a warm home temp. Back when refrigerators had the heating coils in the back, I know people would sometimes put their seedlings on top of the refrigerator because all that warmth would come up and come over. So, you know, again, if you have a thermometer and you can check for temperatures in your home, you can see what makes the most sense for germination. After they've germinated, though, they like a little cooler temperature. So you don't want to keep them in that really warm space or on a heat mat after they've germinated, because that's another reason that they would potentially get leggy and, again, thin, not strong and robust plants. The warmth makes them stretch, as well as not having enough light. So once they've germinated, you're going to take them off a heat mat. You're going to move them to a little cooler area. My basement is ideal temp because it's an unfinished basement, and so there isn't the same temperature as the rest of the house. And you're also going to remove the humidity dome, which we'll talk about a little bit more too. Make sure the soil is well dampened and water the seed in after you cover with the soil. So when you start to go plant your seeds, the soil you're going into, you want to make sure that it's already moistened before you put it into your pots, before you're adding your seeds. If it's really dry, you can put it into a tote or a plastic bag or something that you can kind of enclose, add some water to it, let it kind of hydrate, and then go ahead and plant. And then after you have planted your seeds, you want to water in the seeds so that there is contact between the seeds and the soil. So they're staying moist, and that soil has a connection with the seed, so it'll transfer moisture. If you do this, you generally, and then put a cover over it to germinate, you generally will not have to water your seeds again until they've germinated. A lot of people overwater, and it can cause fungal issues. It can cause something called damping off. So if you have watered like this, if you've watered the soil beforehand, and then you just water the top to gently get the seeds kind of set in the soil and have contact between the soil and the seed, and you just cover it, you'll be retaining that moisture, and you don't need to water it until they've germinated. And even then it won't be, probably a little bit. So as long as you get it set to begin with, you can just run with it until they're uncovered, and then they'll start changing moisture levels. If for some reason your soil is dry in this process, though, water from the bottom. So you can set your whole tray in a container of water so that you don't dislodge the seed. So sometimes if you water it again, your water will actually make the seed pop up to the surface because there's air in it. So if you just set it in a tub of water, it will moisturize the soil without dislodging the seed, without changing the level that it's planted at. And then, like I say here, putting the pot in a closed container either putting the lid over the big seed trays. That's kind of the classic. You can cover it with a plastic bag. You can do whatever works and you have access to. You could put it in a tote and put the lid on it. Just something that your planter will fit, your pots will fit into, and that has some kind of closure so that you are retaining the moisture within that little microbiome. And then as soon as they sprout, you're going to want to take that lid off or take them out of the plastic bag to combat damping off and other issues. Moisture after they've germinated, you really want to keep it as like just the right level and not overly wet, because it can cause issues. So the next step is called growing on. So once your seeds have sprouted and they are going to continue to grow, the phases, you have germination and you have growing on. If you started with a soilless mix, once your seedlings have grown their first true leaves, so you can see in the image down here, this is the seed leaf. That's what I call it, or cotyledon, but I always forget that word. So seed leaf is the first leaves. They're usually ovoid. They're about the same shape as the seed. That varies a little bit, but they always are unlike the actual plant's leaf. So you'll have this one set of leaves that are the seed leaves, and then the next set of leaves and beyond will all look like the true leaf of the plant. So the first set of leaves that look like the true leaf of the plant are called the first true leaf. That is the point where if you're using a soilless mix, you would want to start fertilizing, but you fertilize with a lower level than you would a normal plant. So you're going to use 1/4 of the amount on the directions of your fertilizer every 2 weeks from this point on. Kelp or fish emulsions are great natural fertilizers. Can be a little stinky, but that goes away in time. Worm castings are exceptional for seedlings. So if you do worm composting and you save those worm castings for your seedlings, they'll be extra happy. And then this is also the point where you can use a fan to just keep air circulation going, and that will help with any fungal issues. It will also help give them a little bit of wind resistance, so they're starting to build up that muscle to deal with that before they go outside. If you are using the plant together method that I showed you, where you plant all the seeds in one pot, generally speaking, you are going to separate those into their own individual pots once the plant has 2 true leaves. That way they have enough strength and they're big enough to handle, but you don't have a lot of root growth that's going to be difficult to separate from one another. Growing on temps, like I said, are cooler, so they're about 65 degrees for most plants, and if you grow them on in a too warm environment, they may get leggy, just like if they didn't have enough light. And again, keep adjusting your lights to be just above your plants. So sometimes it seems like they grow an inch overnight. They probably don't, but I'll go in and I'll check everything and see, does it need watering, or how are they doing to the height of the lights, or just have a little happy plant moment. But just make sure that you're adjusting your lights as they're growing so that you're keeping them nice and close to the plant. So this is the process for if you were planting together and then you're going to prick out into their individual plants. You would use pieces of this if you were going to transplant once your plants get big enough. If you did plant them like here separately in their own little cell, then they're going to get to a point where they need to be either transplanted into the garden or into a larger pot. So you would use All of this, if you grew them together and are separating them out, and then you could use the first step where you pop it out, you could then plant it at the same level as it was, and then gently water them in if you were transplanting. So for the plant together version, like I said, you're gonna, just like you would take any pot out of a plant out of a pot, you put your hand over the seedlings and kind of gently turn it upside down and kind of, I usually just kind of squeeze the pot so that I can get the whole root ball, the whole root mass out together. And then you start kind of gently separating slowly but surely until you get down to one seedling. You want to make sure that as you're doing this, you are doing it gently, and also try to make sure you are being extra gentle with the stem, because that is the part of the plant that cannot be regrown by the seedling. It can regrow a leaf, it can regrow a root. If you damage the stem, that seedling may be done for. So just be aware, if you're really worried about it, you can literally hold the seedling by the leaf as you're moving it around. You'll probably get a feel for what is gentle enough, but if you're nervous about it, you can hold it by the actual leaf while you're handling it. As I say in the number 4 here, generally you're going to plant it however the soil level that the plant was at, you want it to be the same soil level for the plant in its new home. The exception is tomatoes. They will grow roots all along their stem, however deep they are planted. So as I transplant tomatoes, I keep planting them as deep as possible because they're going to be bigger and healthier. But generally speaking, they want to be at the same level that they were in their sprouting container as they're growing on, as they're transplanting into the garden. All along the road, they're going to be the same height. All right. So once the temperatures start getting to the point where your seedlings are able to be outside, and that's going to vary depending on the plant. Some of these things are going to be hopefully on the seed packet. If not, you're going to want to do a little research. Each plant has its own comfort zone. Things like basil and tomatoes and peppers will literally be damaged, and their potential for growing fruit during the summer season will be damaged if they are exposed to colder temperatures. Other things, peas, chard, kale, cold weather things, they're fine. They're all good being out in the cold. So just be knowledgeable about what you're growing and what their specific comfort zone is. And then you're going to kind of keep track of the weather to see what makes sense to start moving things out. Once the weather is warm enough for your specific seedlings, you are going to start acclimating them to outside. It's the sunlight, it's the wind, it's changing moisture. Those things are all, they're in kind of a bubble in your homegrown space. And when you move them outside, they suddenly have a lot more to deal with. So you're going to do this gradually. There are 2 ways mainly to do this process. It's termed hardening off. One is to bring them out for a little bit longer each day. And another one is to utilize something like a cold frame or a greenhouse. And so if you are doing the method where you're taking it out a little bit each day, you're going to bring it out on a nice day for a couple hours. You're not going to put it in the sun. You want to give it a little, again, gradual. You don't want to shock it. So put it out for a couple hours in the shade and then take back inside. Each day you're going to keep increasing it a little bit more until those seedlings are out there 24/7. You still want to keep an eye on the weather and make sure that if there are freezing temperatures coming or too cold temperatures for your plant, you're either going to cover it or you're going to bring it back inside. And then the other version, what is going on? All right, so I'm flipping back for a second just because, so the other option is to use a greenhouse or a cold frame. And the nice thing about that is that you can take them out and put them in that, and you don't have to bring them back and forth each day. You're going to be still aware of the weather and what the temperature is inside of that greenhouse or cold frame, so that you know if you need to open it to cool it off, or if it to open it if the weather is okay, the temperature is okay outside, and then close it for it to be cold. It literally is the greenhouse effect. So you want to make sure that even if it's coolish, if it's very sunny, your interior temperature of that greenhouse may be a lot warmer than outside. So I recommend having a thermometer in there so that you can track it. But it's a great low cost level investment that is very helpful, rather than having to schlep seedlings in and out of the house multiple times over a week or so. All right, so back to the here are some fun, interesting resources that I have been enjoying lately for your gardening pleasure. Charles Dowding is a no-dig gardener in the UK who has amazing results. He's an organic gardener and he's a really entertaining guy. He's on social media as well. He has great posts. A Way to Garden is a woman on the East Coast who has a more mixed. Charles Dowding is more vegetables, produce, that kind of thing. A Way to Garden is a more mix between ornamentals and edibles. She also has a podcast. Four Season Farm in Maine by Elliot Coleman. He's a pioneer of all kinds of things, including extending his season year round, and he's in Maine. So he's a colder climate than we are here. And he's done a lot of really fascinating research and work on his farm. And then I just threw up there my Pinterest board in case you're curious about what I'm pinning lately, and to either inspire me or go back to in the future. All right. This is, if you're curious about Tomato Lady, that's me. And I'm also on social media. You may already have known me there. So I'm going to turn this off and we'll go into questions if anybody has any.
Hi, I have a quick question.
Mhm.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm in upstate New York.
Hello.
Hi, family. Hi, family. Gina's my cousin. I'm wondering about, you talk about the dome and the plastic covering. Can you use like saran wrap or something like, I know you said plastic bag. I don't have a dome, and I just kind of was wondering, like, could you use saran wrap, I guess is my one question.
You could. The only downside is that it's not going to be airtight. So you're going to lose some moisture out of the sides unless you just like wrap the heck out of it, like pallet wrap or something.
Gotcha.
That's the benefit of like an actual bag, is that you can close it and it becomes this little, like any moisture that gets evaporated out of the plants will end up like kind of falling back onto the soil. So that's the benefit there.
So like you get like a Ziploc storage bag you could use. Is
You
that
can use
kind of
that.
what
Yeah, I've
Okay.
used just like old bread bags. It doesn't really, not super specific.
Thank you. I'll get creative.
Yeah. We have a question about if you can use radiators for germinating as alternatives to heat mats. I think you probably can, but I would keep an eye on what the temperature is of the soil. It might be too warm. I have forced air, so I don't know for sure, and I've never tried it, but it might be something where like if you put a buffer above the radiator, so it's not quite like on the radiator, that might be the right temperature. you really just want to have some kind of like a thermometer to see where your temperature is, but it has the potential to work. There's a question, what is a heat mat? So they're literally made for seed germination. There's different formats. One is just like a kind of a padded plasticky square that your pots sit on, and it has like a heating coil in it. So it has a little thermostat, and it'll turn on and off the heating coil to keep it at the right temperature. That's probably the most easily accessible version, is like I've seen it at Menards. They're just about the size of your seed tray, and you just plug it into the wall, and it just warms up. It's like a little heat pad. When is the outside soil warm enough to plant tomatoes, peppers, etc.? Peppers, tomatoes, basil are warm weather crops. So I don't know specifically the soil temp, but you want your overnight temperature, your air temp, to be at least 50 degrees. So you'll end up with a little warmer during the day usually, but that's the minimum that they want. Some people say Mother's Day, our weather here has been kind of weird over the last couple of years. So it's better safe than sorry, because you're going to end up covering them once they go on the ground to keep them warm enough if you plant them before it's consistently 50 degrees. And then I still even keep an eye out on the weather. If it's going to go below that at night, you can throw plastic sheeting over it. You can throw a literal sheet over your plants. That'll just give it a little bit of coverage if you have already planted it and it suddenly is going to get cold again. You can take a 5-gallon bucket and pop that over the top, and it'll kind of act like a little cloche. So there are different options that you can deal with after the fact, but you probably don't want to do that long term. So 50 degrees overnight as the low is the goal, to be above, I should say. All right. Are there any issues with using peat pellets for seed starting, e.g. those Jiffy Peat soil pellets? I find those to be very hard. The ones that pop up, I'm assuming is what you're talking about. They're so rigid and hard that I personally don't like them. I actually don't use a soilless mix for my seedlings. I start in a mix that has fertile elements in it, but I know to keep very close eye on any damping off. If there's any issues, I know to remove that immediately. I've done this a lot and for a while, so I kind of do things differently than I did when I started. But I've never felt like those peat pots are very welcoming an environment to a little seed that's trying to get its roots down in there. They're just so dense. But I've seen people use them and use them regularly, so I could be completely wrong. Any thoughts about alternatives to peat, since there is now a climate movement to have gardeners go peat free? Coir, COIR, is probably the most common replacement for it. It's not super easy access to get it, and it's significantly more expensive than peat. I have seen a lot of communication information about issues, but coir is actually the kind of fuzzy, hairy stuff on the outside of a coconut. So it's relatively easy for them to harvest. It's just still hasn't outpriced or out available peat currently. Is it better to use tomato seeds from a tomato or buy the dried ones from one of the sources you mentioned? So it depends on the tomato. And it depends on if you want to go through, there's a little process with harvesting tomato seeds from any tomato. there are plants that are called open pollinated, and those are plants that have been grown for years and for many generations without controlling any cross pollination. So they're going to grow true to the plant. So if you took seeds from that tomato, they're going to grow a tomato just like the parent tomato in the next generation. A lot of hybridized tomatoes are not open pollinated, so they're very specific as to what they allow cross pollination with or not. So once they've grown this tomato, after they're done, they're not growing this for seed, they're growing and selling this tomato. You bought it at the grocery store, whatever. That tomato is more likely to just have been cross-pollinated. And so your tomato that you grew from that tomato seed isn't necessarily going to look like the original tomato you started with, because that's one of the parents, what it looks like. The other parent that it's crossed with is some other plant that you don't know what it looks like. And, recessive genes and all of that genetic fun means that unless it's specifically an open pollinated tomato to begin with, your tomato that you harvest, that you save seeds from, isn't necessarily going to look like that tomato if you grow it. There is also a process, if you save tomato seeds, of fermenting them to get, there's a little coating that inhibits them germinating. So if you do, or if you are using open pollinated tomato plants and you want to harvest your seeds from them, just it's easy to do. I'm just not going to go into it here. You basically just put the seeds in water and let them rot for a little bit, but do a quick Google search and it'll tell you how to do it. But if you're using seeds from a tomato that you bought somewhere, you don't know what the origins of the original seeds are, you can either take your chance or just, definitely know that it's not necessarily going to be true to the original plant. All right. Justice, thank you very much. You're welcome. Super interesting and a whole new level of respect for you and the seedlings we're going to receive. Do you have a few favorite tomatoes this year that you are offering? We're just about to submit our order and do not want to miss on your favorites. There are ones that I grow every year, black cherry, purple Cherokee, sun gold. Those are just like every year. I cannot not plant those. This year, I watched a presentation through Seed Savers from somebody who's doing a lot of hybridization, like natural hybridization work. And he's been working with what are called dwarf tomatoes. So they are kind of like, there's determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. Determinate grow to a certain height and stop. Indeterminate will keep growing as long as it's warm enough for them to grow. The indeterminate tomatoes tend to have the better flavored fruit. They tend to be the varieties that are more interesting, a lot of the heirlooms. But of course you end up with, the potential for a 10-foot tall tomato plant. So what they're doing is taking the flavor of the fruit of those plants and crossing it with plants that have the shorter height, the determinate type growing system. And so you're getting a plant that's a little bit smaller. It's gonna hang out in your tomato cage and be okay and not go everywhere, go crazy, but still have a really great flavored tomato. So there's a bunch of dwarf plants that I have not grown yet, but they were so fascinating to me that I ended up adding, I don't know, 5 or 7 or 8 new varieties. I'm really curious about those. So those are kind of my new favorites potentially for this year. So we'll see. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. hopefully you get a chance to get your hands in the dirt sometime soon. And stay warm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.